This morning's reading comes from Isaiah 51, and it reads as follows. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look at the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him. For the Lord comforts Zion, and he comforts all her waste places and makes her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Give attention to me, my people, and give ear to me, my nation. For a law will go out from me, and I will set my justice for a light to the peoples. My righteousness draws near, my salvation has gone out, and my arms will judge the peoples. The coastlands hope for me and wait for my arm, and for my arm they wait. Lift your eyes to the heavens and look at these earths beneath. Look at the earth beneath, for the heavens vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and they who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will never be dismayed. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Fear not the reproach of men, nor be dismayed at their revilings. For the mouth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation to all generations.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, family. As we turn to the word, I'm going to just pray and ask the Lord's help again as we come before him in this beautiful passage. Lord, as we are seeking to know you and eternal life in you, what a wonder it is to be able to meet you in your word. Lord, as we turn our hearts to you, we just pray that you would remove the thorns and the thistles that grow up so easily and entangle us and distract us from what you would have us know about you, how you would have us respond to you. We pray that you would remove the stony ground, that your word would root deeply in us. And we pray, Lord, that you would stay the hand of the enemy who would come and take your word and remove it from our hearing as soon as we've heard it. Most especially, Lord, I pray that as I open my mouth to speak your word this morning, that you would make it good seed, that the gospel would be heard as we engage with you, our mighty, righteous God, this morning. Amen. Friends, we do continue in our series of understanding who God is. This morning, we are saying about God being righteous. And I want to title this message, The Pursuit of Righteousness. So it's the 4th of July. And our friends in America will be waking up later this morning to celebrate their Independence Day. And we know that the Declaration of Independence has these words, that all men are created equal and have been endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, we're not talking about happiness per se, although to know the righteous God is to produce happiness in us. What does it mean to pursue righteousness? Just this passage starts with, listen to me, those who pursue righteousness. We might want to just take a step back and say, what are we talking about when we talk about righteousness? Again, not a word that we tend to use in daily language. The one example I could think of where we know what righteous means is Crush the Turtle from Nemo, where he cries out, "Righteous, righteous," as they're screaming through the current heading for Sydney. But for those of you who are surfers amongst our Joburg citizens, which I think is probably zero, that's not what righteous means. So what is righteous? I want to ask you a question about what your expectations are. What sets expectations in your life? So a good way to get a handle on this is if you think about how you make decisions in your life. What voices are you hearing in your head as you make decisions? Who will approve of the decision that you're about to make, or the action that you're about to take? Who is it that you're trying to please? When you're discerning right and wrong, what's the standard by which you judge that? What does it mean? Who are you thinking about when you think of right and wrong? So Doug Wilson wrote in a blog just in this last couple of weeks about when we get to some kind of event or action or happening in our lives, there's this hypothetical audience, right? So if you think of your life as being on a stage, there's this hypothetical audience in your life that when something happens, you glance at the audience, think, what do they think? Funny enough, I remember that from BC cartoons. I don't know if any of you remember BC cartoons, but at some point when there's the punchline, BC stares at the audience with this funny look on his face, because that's when you know you're supposed to laugh. Who's in your audience? Who are the people that set expectations for your life as you go from day to day trying to make decisions or respond to things? What's interesting about that question is the idea of right and wrong is really ubiquitous. There's another great word. I just wanted to use that. You probably wouldn't know the word ubiquitous unless you have been in computing recently. It's a really cool word. It just means everywhere, right? So something's ubiquitous if it's everywhere. Well, the idea of right and wrong is everywhere. That's the most interesting thing. If you speak to an atheist, and Thomas and I were speaking about this earlier in the week, they have a sense, even though they don't believe in God, they have a sense that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And they will make statements like, well, this is just wrong. But the question is, well, how do you know? And what gives you that sense of this being just plain wrong? Where does that sense come from? Other religions are able to say, this is right and this is wrong. This week I came across some quotes describing Islam. There's a website which is about getting people into Islam, and it describes Islam in these beautiful terms. It makes you want to care for the poor and help the disabled. Well, these are things that we would agree with and say, well, those are good. But the question is, are they ultimately good? Just what does it mean for us to be considering right and wrong? And here's another word which is very prominent, not only in our own news in this last week, but just in the world in general: justice. Justice and righteousness are friends. They go together. Because if righteousness is a line of what is right and wrong, then justice is about our responding to what is right and wrong. So these are the kind of questions that we want to answer from Isaiah's passage. And the more I've looked at this passage, the more it just captured me in its beauty of what God is saying. We're right in the middle of the servant songs here. Servant songs where God has, in chapter 40, 41 of Isaiah, he's established the falsehood of the false gods and false religion. And then he introduces his servant who will come and bring justice on the face of the earth, basically vindicate God's glory. That's what the servant, our Lord Jesus Christ, has come to do in terms of the kingdom of God. Justice comes from God. So this is how I want to summarize it. You've got it on your outline there. I changed it slightly. after we added it to the outline. But here's the summary. God's righteousness overtakes you so that God's people pursue him in righteousness and stand firm in truth or against unrighteousness. It's really what that is meaning. And what I want you to see here is how we are overtaken. We are pursued by the righteousness of God, and we respond to him personally, relationally. But let's just start out with that first point, right from the first two lines of the first verse. What does it mean for us to chase after righteousness? Look at that first verse again. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord. Immediately, we have to ask some basic definition questions. What does righteousness mean? What does it mean to be right, as it were? Because that's really what it comes down to. Righteousness is about, there is a standard, a line, and if God draws the line, righteousness as a concept is a measure of how close we as his people line up with that line. But we're talking here mainly about the righteousness of God. And so it's very interesting that we can say God lines up with his own expectations. When you think about righteousness, you have to keep the two things in mind. Number one is expectations, and number two is relationships. Here's a definition. This comes from a Bible encyclopedia. It says righteousness is the fulfillment of expectations in any relationship, whether with God or with other people. Righteousness is not simply an abstract idea of keeping some rules or regulations. Righteousness is about the expectations between two people in a relationship. And most especially, biblical righteousness is about God's expectations of the people who are in relationship with him. Even that, you can say there's a relationship of people who are reconciled to him, and there's a relationship of people who are in rebellion against him. But righteousness is about what God expects of people, and it's always in terms of his character. It's always about God expecting people to behave in a way that is consistent with the character of God, and God himself behaving in that same way. He's always consistent with his own character. So righteousness as a principle is about lining up in relationship to God with the character of who God is. So why do we need to pursue it? He says, listen to me, those who pursue righteousness, as if it is something that is far off, if it is something that is not natural to us. Well, it's not. We know that we are born in sin. David tells us that. Surely I was conceived in iniquity, he says in Psalm 51. We were brought forth in our sin. Paul tells us in Romans 3 that there is no one who pursues God. No one seeks after God. No one is righteous. Not even one. Not even one is righteous. So there might be times when we look at our lives and we more or less are in line with the things of God. Kind of to an extent, we can say there's some goodness there. We line up with what God is calling us to do. But the Bible is very clear that as a principle, the nature of our hearts is in rebellion against God. We, a few weeks ago, spoke about not being able to please God because our natural self, our flesh, hates God. Those are harsh words from the scriptures, but they are true. It's what God tells us who we are. So by nature, we are not able to be righteous, but there's this call to go after it. We are the ones who chase after righteousness, which introduces the next question, well, where is it found? And the second line says, you who seek Yahweh. You can't separate the idea of wanting to pursue rightness from the person of Yahweh himself, of God himself. Who are these people that want to pursue righteousness? So it's an interesting question to ask Isaiah. As I said, we're here to find ourselves in the servant song, amongst the servant songs, where Isaiah has been speaking again and again and again to the people of God and calling them back to line up with his character because they have rebelled against him. If I take you back to chapter 2, these are some of the descriptions of the sin of Israel. The first 5 chapters of Isaiah's book are introductory. In chapter 2, he says, for you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of things from the east and of fortune tellers like the Philistines. They strike hands with the children of foreigners. The land is filled with silver and gold. There's no end to their treasures. Their land is filled with horses. There's no end to their chariots. The land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have made. The covenant people of God are in a position of out and out rebellion against God. And that is what Isaiah's book is written for. He's calling God's people, covenant people, back to him. And amongst this group, you're going to find those frustrated, angry with the wickedness of God's people, those who are born in the covenant. And so the message starts out to those people who say, you pursuing righteousness. But it expands broader than that. Is it not true that our world is filled and full of people who are looking for the good, looking for some measure of right and wrong? All people around the world are trying to define right and wrong by some standard. Here we are seeing that you're not going to find that in worldly wisdom. You're not going to find right and wrong even in a book of law necessarily. You're not going to find right and wrong in the book of psychology or philosophy or in somebody's latest blog site. You're going to find a clear understanding of what it means to be right. You're going to find it with God himself. So the call goes out. If you are trying to find a sense of right and wrong, here's the answer. Listen to me, God says. Seek me, God says. Remember Psalm 23? The shepherd needs to lead the sheep in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. We need to be led. And it seems to me the problem in our world as this connects with us is this very question of justice and doing what's right. Justice is a big term. Social justice is an even bigger term right now. You hear justice all the time. No, you never hear anybody speaking about righteousness, doing what's right. You hear people speaking about doing what's right for me. If you, Ray Comfort in his evangelistic material, The Way of the Master, he says, if you ask anybody in the world, are you a good person? Their pride will automatically cause them to say, yes, of course I'm a good person. And if you ask anybody, are you pursuing righteousness? After you've explained to them what you mean, they will say, yes, 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 I want to be like that. I'm a person who definitely tries to do right as much as I can. And so all sorts of questions open up for us. How do we find righteousness? How do we chase after righteousness? I love how this turns around on us, because what God now says to the people who are seeking after right in the world, whether they are people who genuinely know him or are just people who are frustrated and innately know that there's something wrong in the world, whichever one they are, here's the answer is the same. Look to me. What we find as we go into our second point is that we who are chasing righteousness have actually been found by righteousness. Look to the rock, the second part of verse 1, from which you were hewn, the quarry from which you were dug. Anybody come across any stones that dug themselves out of the ground? Do you have a nice piece of granite that one day just decided to cut itself straight and polish itself and put itself in your kitchen, on your kitchen counter maybe? No, rocks don't do that, right? It requires somebody to come and lift it out. And a quarry is not a very interesting place, actually. It's quite dirty and dusty and muddy and messy. But God is saying, I, God, your covenant God, am the one who have lifted you out. It reminds me of Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the statue, and Daniel speaks of, or the vision, and Daniel explains, speaks of the rock cut out without hands. God himself has lifted his people out, formed his people out of the dust of the ground. And he reminds Israel in particular that they were born to Abraham and Sarah, a barren woman in her old age who could not have children. And yet there was a promise, was there not? To Abraham and Sarah, that through them blessings would come to the nations, a great multitude would come from them. When he was but one, God says, I multiplied him. The reminder here is an encouragement, because the point is that those who are seeking after righteousness, those who are running for the righteousness of God, really discover that God, who is righteous, is the one who has brought it about, is the one who has done everything necessary and required. And the encouragement is there are times when it's just a remnant. You look around the world and you think, is there really anybody who knows what's going on? Like Elijah, who defeated the prophets of Baal, ran down to the capital city to confront Jezebel, but things didn't go as expected. And she stood up to him, and he ran away in fear. And he complains to God, they've killed everybody. All the prophets are dead. I'm the only one. And God says, Elijah, I've got 7,000 who have not bowed the knee. You see, God is always at work, always up to something. And when we look at the world around us, we think there's just no encouragement. There's no hope. There's no way forward. There's no justice in the world. God says, well, look at where you've come from. Look at what I have done in my righteousness. And be encouraged that God will keep doing that. And the comfort then comes to God's people. Here he says, verse 3, the Lord comforts Zion. He comforts her all her waste places. He makes her wilderness like Eden. He makes the desert places of your life into the Garden of Eden, where he walks with his people. The result of this is that what you hope for is guaranteed, not because you are the one who pursues righteousness, but because God, who does what is right, and God, who always acts with consistency to his own character and keeps his promises and is faithful to his word, is the one who brings about the comfort of his people. God will always do what is right. And that results in verse 3, in joy and gladness and comfort and Eden in the wilderness. And there's a forward-looking part to this promise where the kingdom of God is coming to be established. But there's a reality to it in our hearts today to know that the righteous God is at work in our lives to bring about his good purposes. There's a longing in this passage, isn't there? There's a longing for God. This pursuit of righteousness says, I need something in my heart. I need something more than what the world is giving me. And God answers it in very stark and clear terms. Being found by righteousness means that, as we saw in Psalm 73 just a few weeks ago, all of our longings, all of our satisfaction, all of our desires are satisfied in the God of righteousness. The God who does according to his good purpose. The God who always acts according to his own character and expectations. Comfort and joy are for those who look to him. He continues into verse 4 to say, give attention to me, my people. And I want you to see verse 7, just glance down there a moment. Listen to me, you who know righteousness. What is God saying? See, behind all of this, verse 1, verse 4, verse 7, God is calling out to his people, and he's saying, your satisfaction is not in making up for yourself the standards of right and wrong. Your satisfaction is in knowing me. Remember, the definition of righteousness is about expectations in terms of relationship. That relationship aspect is so critical for us to understand how we relate back to the God who is righteous. Now, I want you to think about how you approach the question of being right and being wrong in your life, and most especially in response to God. What's interesting about considering the righteousness of God, God as righteous, is everything I'm putting emphasis on so far is about our response back to him. And I think it's very difficult to, at this point, separate God who is righteous from his people who respond to him. And the reason for that is because if righteousness is about God's expectations, then the measure of it is about how we come to him, how we think about him. We've spoken about God as holy, altogether set apart. And often we confuse the idea of God being holy and our righteousness to him. See, if we are holy as he is holy, which is his call to his people, then what it means is that we are set apart, we are determined, we are devoted, we are given to him. And that's going to look like something. We mustn't get confused and say that just because I follow these 7 steps or keep to these rules that I am now holy. No. Being holy is about being devoted to God, but that is going to come out in a way of living. And that really is the point of the passage that we looked at last week, as in Exodus 19, going into Exodus 20, where the 10 commandments are given. God is saying, you are the redeemed people of God. I've brought you out to see my holy goodness. Indeed, my holy righteousness. My holy love for you as a people. And because you are my people, this then is how I expect you as my people to live and respond. And that's why he gives us at that point the 10 commandments, the law of God. What I really want you to take away from this passage, though, is that this pursuing of righteousness is not about asking, what can I get away with? John Piper, some years ago, spoke about asking the wrong question of God. And I may have shared this before. You see, there are times when we ask, what as a Christian am I allowed to do? What am I still allowed to do now that I'm a Christian? Am I still allowed to go to that place, to listen to that music, to watch that movie? Am I still allowed to use certain kinds of language because, well, it's just how I express myself? Am I still allowed to do certain things, read certain books, look at certain websites? John Piper says that's entirely the wrong question, because that is about serving me. It's not about serving God. Our question as those who pursue the God of righteousness should be, what honors God most? How is the Lord Jesus Christ honored by the use of my time, the use of my energy, the use of my resources? What can I bring to him if I'm going to be devoted to him as he is holy and I want to be holy before him? What can I do? What can I bring to him that satisfies him, that keeps him happy? You see, then righteousness becomes less about staying within the lines, not crossing the boundaries of the law, and more about meeting the joyous, beautiful expectations of the God who loves me. If your parents have set expectations for you, your dad's always saying to you, tidy up your room, keep the place tidy, and then you walk into the lounge and you find his shoes scattered all over the lounge floor. And do your parents fall short of their own expectations that they set you? Does your boss fall short of the expectations that he set you or she set you? Do your teachers require of you a higher standard of goodness on the school grounds than they themselves are willing to keep? How easily, friends, we become Pharisees. Remember what Jesus said to the Pharisees, you weigh up heavy burdens on people, but you're not willing even to lift a little finger to help them. How easily we make righteousness about keeping some laws, about making sure we tick all the boxes. Guys, if you were doing something nice for your wife, if you were thinking about a gift for a birthday, if you sit down and you think, what's the smallest gift I can buy and still make it look like I thought about this gift? Or is that satisfying? No. That's not about being devoted. I mean, God calls us to pursue the righteousness that he himself lays down. First of all, he is righteous, and so he will always act within his own character. And secondly, what he is calling you to do is not just keep a checkbox of things that are right and wrong. He's calling you to himself. He's calling you to love him, to respond to him in person. See, that is why the world is able to say, oh, here's some right and wrong things. And they kind of line up with our general expectations of good and bad, because God has put within them, the heart of every human being, a sense of himself. But when we come to the scriptures and we ask questions of, well, what is the thing that we can get away with? If you look at the kind of debates around the scriptures that deal with LGBTQ and homosexuality, you'll notice that there's a lot of nitpicking about words, but very little about the character of God who created us. And when people eventually want to end a debate and silence their opponents, they'll say something like, the God that I know, the God that I believe in, wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. See, that's not righteousness based on the character of God. That's determining right and wrong based on the God that you have created in your own mind. When you are asking what is right and what is wrong in the world, when you are looking for justice, you need to look to the character of God who reveals himself in his law, who reveals himself by the things that he requires of us, the things that he does for us, the promises that he gives to us. We need to ask, what satisfies my God? My covenant God who has brought me into the covenant of grace. And if you are still questioning and asking, well, I'm not sure if I believe in this God that you speak of. I'm not sure if I'm ready and willing to give myself over to this. Well, notice again that what God is calling you to in the Christian faith is not simply a list of this is good, this is bad. He is calling you to look to him. So the third point is about hope in the God of righteousness. As we look to summarize verse 3 to verse 6, I can ask you a question at this point of what is it that grabs your attention most in your life? Where do you give your attention? Well, God says in verse 4, give attention to me, my people. Give ear to me, my nation. What are you listening for as you try to answer this question of right and wrong? Those who have knowledge of righteousness, and just glancing quickly to verse 7, have the law of God written in their hearts. These are the ones that he calls to listen to him. The covenant promise is to have the law of God written in our hearts. But that gives us hope. And so we are called to give attention to God, the righteous one, the one who brings justice. Have a look at how righteousness, salvation, and justice are all caught up into one. They're all tied together in God's vocabulary. Let me read these verses again. Verse 4, give attention to me, my people. Give ear to me, my nation. For the law will go out from me. God himself will establish justice on the earth. A law here is about the rule of God on the earth, in his kingdom. And you might ask questions about when exactly that's going to be and how exactly it's going to come about. Well, the fact is that Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, seated at the right hand of majesty on high, rules over the nations even today. God has established through his word, through his spirit, and through the working of the Son, he has established a law for the nations. You want to know where's right and wrong? God is ruling from heaven today. That is how we know right from wrong. And so because of that, he will set justice for a light for the peoples. God is the one who will act justly. God is the one who will bring about a just judgment, a correct discernment, a correct answer, because he always acts in terms of his own character, and that is his righteousness, which in verse 5 draws near. And in his righteousness coming near to us, his victory, his deliverance, him bringing everything in terms of who he is, he brings salvation. He saves the people who are pursuing righteousness. How do you get into that position that you are pursuing righteousness? Or has he not already told us that he is the one who brings it about? He is the one who transforms our hearts. He is the one who lifts us up out of the dust. because he is the one who's ruling. Jesus Christ exercises his rule even now, even over your heart. He rules, the Westminster Catechism says, he rules and subdues us to himself, and he defeats all his and our enemies. Friends, when we look outside of God for, first of all, a standard of right and wrong, and secondly, to see justice in this world, we will be disappointed. But God says, verse 5, my righteousness draws near, my salvation has gone out, my arms will judge the people. And here's the hope, the end of verse 5, the coastlands hope for me, and for my arm they wait. The world, which is completely upside down in these early decades of the 21st century, is waiting for the justice of God, waiting for the righteous God to move. And he has already established justice through his servant. And we who are caught up in the covenant people of God are the echo of that, and we are moving that good news out into the world. We're taking it to the coastlands. Verse 6, he says, lift up your eyes to the heavens, look at the earth beneath. Look around you. Look at what's happening. The heavens vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment. For as long as you and I are putting our hope and our trust in earthly justice and right and wrong and the ability to save ourselves, we will be disappointed. We will be, that last word of verse 6, dismayed. But give attention to me, my people. Draw close to me. I am the God who has lifted you, brought you to myself. I am the God who always acts in terms of my own character. I have not called you to do anything that I myself am not willing, able to do. In actual fact, all of the righteous standard that I have given you is who I am. It's my character. And we find that so vividly portrayed in Jesus Christ himself, who has not called his people to do anything but that which he himself was willing to do already. We look to him. We look to him because all forms of worldly justice and righteousness are going to ultimately fail. But God is the one who stands firm. My salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will never be dismayed. It will never fail, friends, because God is righteous. He will never fail to do what is right. He will never fail to bring about his purposes. And that means that we can stand firm in righteousness. In the last two verses, again, listen to me. Listen to me. Notice here how the righteousness, those who know righteousness, are those whose law is written in their hearts. That is the covenant promise. The new covenant promise, indeed, is that the law of God will be written in our hearts. Are you trying to pursue righteousness by trying desperately to understand what God wants and staying within those lines as well as you can while still enjoying your life? How close can I get to the line? Well, here's the call. Your heart needs to be given over to God, the righteous God. Then you will know what righteousness is. Then there will be no fear of man. You will not be dismayed at the mockings, the revilings of men. The outcome for those who deny the righteousness of God is they will be eaten up by the moth, destroyed by the worm. But the God who does not change, the God who is always consistent and faithful, who always does what is right, he will stand forever. His salvation is for all generations. He is the unchanging God. In closing, I want to read two sections to you. The first one is from John's first letter, chapter 2. My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. In other words, so that you may stay on the right side of right and wrong. You may line up with the expectations of your good Father. But then John says, if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous, the one who has perfectly kept all the expectations of his Father. And then John tells us he is the propitiation for our sins. He's the one who has died in the place of sinners. Not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. This gospel goes out to all people. He is a light indeed of justice to the nations. By this we know that we have come to know him. If we keep his commandments, if we meet his expectations, if our hearts cry out to meet the expectations of our Father, by that we know that we know him. Whoever says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. By this we may be sure that we are with him, that we are in him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way that he, that is Jesus Christ, the great servant of God, has walked. Proverbs chapter 3 says, trust in Yahweh with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. He will make your path straight. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. What do I want you to see in Isaiah 51 this morning? Friends, there is a calling that we ought to be pursuing righteousness. But God is very clear that that calling has already been brought about, fulfilled, indeed established by his covenant work and in Jesus Christ, who is the righteous one. The call to us is to be pursuing, meeting the glorious expectations of our good Father, our good shepherd. Remember the older brother who stood outside the house and said, I've always kept every commandment of yours. But his love for the Father had grown cold. The call for us, friends, is to love our Father, and in so doing, be stirred up with the desire to meet the righteous expectations of God, who is consistent with his character, and to trust him to bring about true and real justice in a world in which justice is missing. And we can know, because God is righteous, that he is always faithful to what he does. Let us pray. Lord, would you have our hearts? I know I pray that often, but here it is. The hearts of the righteous are given to God. But we know from the scriptures that none of us on our own is righteous. None of us is blameless before God except in Jesus Christ, the righteous, who is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Thank you that because you are faithful, we can stand firm when all worldly systems of righteousness and justice fall apart. Thank you that your word is faithful and true, that indeed every word is trustworthy, because it reflects the character of the trustworthy God. Let us, Lord, be drawn to you, our Father, and in so doing, be satisfied in you and keep your righteous commandments out of love and joy for knowing you. Amen.